If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Continuing on. The morning in New York City awoke with its usual frantic rhythm. Traffic was already starting to thicken on the main avenues. Crowded buses cut through the streets in a hurry, and people walked briskly along the sidewalks, each immersed in their own world. It was an ordinary Monday, the kind that repeats itself tirelessly, without much promise of novelty. But for Michael Taylor, that day would be different, even if he didn't know it when he woke. Michael was 42 years old, with an elegant posture that drew attention wherever he went, greying hair at his temples that gave him a distinguished air, and brown eyes that always seemed tired, as if they carried an invisible weight. He owned a financial consulting firm that had prospered over the years, turning him into a man of means. His mansion was in the upscale neighborhood of the Upper East Side, an imposing 3-story building with a swimming pool, a well-tended garden, and a garage that housed 2 imported cars. Anyone from the outside would look at his life and think there was a fulfilled man, someone who had achieved everything he had ever dreamed of. But the truth was that Michael lived in the deepest void a human being can experience. 7 years, 7 long years had passed since Julia left his life. Julia Miller, the woman who had been his great love, his partner, the one who had shared his most intimate dreams and his most secret fears. Their marriage had lasted 5 years, 5 years of a happiness that seemed unshakable, until everything fell apart abruptly and painfully. Michael still remembered that day, as if it were yesterday. The accusations, the screams, her tears, his anger, a misunderstanding that snowballed, fueled by pride, jealousy, and words spoken in the heat of the moment that could never be taken back. Julia had left, taking only her clothes and her dignity, leaving behind the furniture, the memories, and his heart in pieces. In the first few months after the separation, Michael tried to distract himself with work. He threw himself headfirst into business, expanded the company, closed important contracts, and traveled to conferences abroad. But none of it filled the hole that had settled in his chest. He also tried a few superficial relationships, casual encounters that never lasted more than a few weeks. No woman compared to Julia. None had that smile that lit up the room, that contagious laugh, that unique way of looking at him and making him feel special. Over time, Michael gave up looking. He resigned himself to loneliness, building an invisible dome around himself that protected him from the world, but also imprisoned him. The mansion that should have been a home had become just a large, silent house. Michael woke up every morning in the same king-size bed, had breakfast alone, at the table that seated 8, worked in his office until late, and returned to sleep. The end. The routine repeated without variation. The housekeeper, Mrs. Teresa, a pleasant 60-year-old woman, was practically the only human company he had during the week. She tried to strike up a conversation sometimes, but Michael always responded with monosyllables, lost in his thoughts. He knew Mrs. Teresa felt sorry for him, but he couldn't do anything to change it. On that specific Monday morning, Michael woke up with the feeling that something was different, though he couldn't identify what. He got up, showered, put on one of his impeccably tailored Italian suits, and went down for breakfast. Mrs. Teresa had already prepared everything: fresh fruit, warm croissants, freshly brewed coffee, freshly squeezed orange juice. Everything perfect, everything organized, everything lifeless. He grabbed his car keys and left. He had an important meeting at 9 in the morning at his office in the city center. The drive from the Upper East Side to Park Avenue usually took about 20 minutes if traffic was favorable. Michael started the car, a gleaming black sedan, and began to drive. But he had barely gone 2 blocks when he noticed a strange noise coming from the engine. It was a metallic, repetitive sound that grew in intensity. Worried, he pulled the car over and turned it off. He tried to start it again, but the engine sputtered and died. He tried once more, and nothing. The car simply refused to work. Michael swore under his breath, something he rarely did. He took out his cell phone and called roadside assistance. After a few minutes of waiting and explaining, they told him a tow truck would arrive in about an hour to take the vehicle to the dealership. An hour. He looked at his watch. It was 7:20 in the morning. If he waited for the tow truck, he would miss the meeting. He thought about calling a cab or a ride-sharing app, but something in him, perhaps the accumulated frustration of years of a mechanical and predictable life, decided against it. He would take the subway. Michael hadn't taken public transportation in over 10 years. Since his company had taken off, he had always had his own car, a driver when necessary, comfort and privacy. The idea of mixing with the crowd on the subway was strange to him, almost alien. But at that moment, with few options and determined to get to the office, he walked to the nearest station. The subway station was a human anthill. People of all ages, social classes, professions, all pushing, running, going up and down stairs in a hurry. The smell was a mixture of sweat, cheap perfume and fried food from a nearby snack bar. Michael bought his ticket, went through the turnstile, and went down to the platform. The train arrived a few minutes later, already packed. He got on with difficulty, pushed by the crowd behind him. He managed to find a spot to hold onto a pole, but was squeezed between several people. The sensation was suffocating. The train departed with a jolt. Michael closed his eyes for a moment, trying to abstract himself from the uncomfortable situation. He thought about the meeting awaiting him, the numbers he needed to present, the quarterly goals. But his mind, as it always had in recent years, eventually drifted to Julia. He wondered where she was now, if she was happy, if she had rebuilt her life with someone else. The pain of missing her was still sharp, even after so much time. He had learned to live with it, but he had never truly overcome it. It was then that he heard it. A child's voice, soft and crystal clear, began to sing. It was a simple melody, almost a lullaby, but it had something deeply touching about it. The voice was pure, innocent, filled with a sweetness that contrasted brutally with the chaotic environment of the crowded subway. Michael opened his eyes and looked around, trying to locate where the sound was coming from. That's when he saw the girl. She was a few feet away, standing near one of the car doors. She must have been about 6 or 7 years old, small and thin, with long brown hair tied in 2 slightly crooked braids. She wore simple clothes, a faded pink t-shirt and jeans patched at the knees. Her feet were in worn-out sneakers, with one of the laces untied. But what really caught his attention was her face. She had large, expressive eyes, a deep brown that shone with an inner light. As she sang, a shy smile formed on her lips, as if the music transported her to a better place. And then Michael recognized the song. His heart raced. It was that one. Their song. Julia's song. It was an old song, almost forgotten by modern times, but it had been significant at crucial moments in their relationship. The first time Michael had heard that melody was on his first date with Julia, in a cozy cafe in Greenwich Village. She had hummed the tune while distractedly stirring sugar into her coffee, not realizing he was completely enchanted. Later, that same song played during their wedding, a soft instrumental version that accompanied the couple's first dance. And finally, ironically, it was also the last thing he heard from Julia on the night she left. She hummed that song while packing her bags, tears silently streaming down her face. Michael felt a lump in his throat. The memories came all at once, violent and inescapable. He saw himself again in that cafe, looking at Julia with the enamored eyes of someone who had just discovered the love of his life. He saw himself dancing with her at the wedding, whispering eternal promises in her ear. And he also saw himself at the bedroom door watching her pack, unable to find the right words to make her stay, trapped in a proud silence that had destroyed everything. The girl finished singing, and a few people applauded discreetly. She thanked them with a shy nod and held out a small, empty soda can to receive some coins. Michael watched as a few passengers dropped in some change. Most ignored her, absorbed in their phones or simply too rushed to care. The girl didn't seem discouraged. She just smiled and continued walking through the car, singing again in a low voice. Something inside Michael stirred. It wasn't just curiosity, it was an urgent, almost desperate need to understand why this child knew that song, why of all the songs in the world she had chosen that particular one. He began to move through the crowded car, saying, "Excuse me," apologizing as he bumped into people until he managed to get close to the girl. She had stopped near one of the priority seats, and was putting the can into the small pink backpack she carried on her back. Michael crouched down to be at her level. The girl looked at him with an expression of surprise mixed with caution. It was understandable. A child alone on a crowded subway needed to be careful with strangers. He smiled, trying to seem as non-threatening as possible. "Hi," he said, his voice soft. "You sing very well." The girl relaxed a little and returned the smile. "Thank you, mister," she replied in a small voice. "My name is Michael," he introduced himself. "And what's your name?" "Isabella," she said, "but everyone calls me Bella." Isabella. The name sounded familiar to Michael, but he couldn't place why. "Nice to meet you, Bella. That song you were singing is very beautiful. Where did you learn it?" Isabella's eyes lit up. "My mom taught me," she answered with pride. "She sings that song every day. She says it's special, that it has an important story, but she never told me what it is." Michael felt a shiver run down his spine. "Your mom sings that song every day?" He tried to keep his voice calm, but emotion was beginning to overflow. Isabella nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, sir, especially when she's sad. She says the music reminds her of someone important, but when I ask who, she just smiles and gets quiet." The train began to slow down, announcing the next station. Michael realized he had only a few minutes before the girl got off, and he lost sight of her forever. "Are you alone, Bella?" he asked, looking around for an adult who might be with the child. Isabella looked down, a little ashamed. "I am. My mom isn't well. She can't work right now. So I come to sing on the subway to get a little money. She doesn't know I do this. She thinks I'm at school. But I leave early and come here." Michael's heart ached. Such a small child, alone, trying to support her home while her mother was sick. The situation was desperate, and at the same time the little girl's courage and determination were heartbreaking. "You shouldn't be doing this alone, Bella. It's dangerous for a child. Where is your home? I can take you." Isabella looked at him with suspicion. "My mom told me never to go with strangers." Michael nodded, understanding. "Your mom is right, but I won't hurt you, I promise. I just want to make sure you get home safely. Do you live far?" The girl hesitated, biting her lower lip as she thought. Finally, she said, "I live in the South Bronx. It's really far from here. I need to take 2 more rides." Michael knew the neighborhood. It was a peripheral area in the northern part of New York City, distant, with many low-income areas. The journey would indeed be long and complicated for a child alone. "Then let me go with you," he insisted. "That way you'll be safe and I'll have peace of mind knowing you got home okay." Isabella seemed to ponder for a few more moments. There was something in Michael's eyes, a genuine kindness, that made her trust him. "Okay," she finally agreed. "But only to my street. My mom can't know I was singing on the subway." They got off at the next station, and Michael followed Isabella through line transfers, then to a bus. During the entire journey, which took almost an hour and a half, the two talked. Isabella was surprisingly communicative. She told him about her school, her friends, how she loved to draw and dreamed of being an artist when she grew up. She talked about the cartoons she watched on television, about the stray cat she secretly fed and had named Sylvester. She laughed easily, gestured animatedly as she told her stories, and Michael found himself smiling genuinely for the first time in a very, very long time. There was something about this child that touched him deeply. It wasn't just the song, though, that had been the initial trigger. It was Isabella herself, with her innocence, her resilience, her ability to find joy even amid evident hardship. She made him remember that there was still goodness in the world, that there were still pure and true things, and, in some inexplicable way, she made him feel alive again. When they finally arrived in the South Bronx, the sun was already high in the sky. Michael had completely missed his office meeting, but he didn't care. This felt infinitely more important. Isabella guided him through narrow, uneven streets, past simple houses, some well-kept, others in a state of disrepair. Children played in the street. Women chatted on the sidewalks. Men worked in small makeshift workshops. It was a world completely different from the one Michael lived in, but there was a palpable humanity here that his empty mansion on the Upper East Side would never have. "This is it," Isabella said, stopping in front of a small house. The building was modest, painted a faded yellow with a rusty iron gate that creaked when opened. There was a small garden in front, with some flowers planted in repurposed paint cans. It was humble, but there was a visible care, an effort to keep the space dignified. Michael looked at the house and felt a strange emotion grow inside him. It was as if something very important was about to happen. "Want to come in?" Isabella asked. "My mom will like meeting you. You were very nice to me." He hesitated for a moment. Entering a stranger's home just like that felt like an intrusion, but at the same time something was pulling him forward, an invisible force he couldn't resist. "All right," he said, "but just for a minute." Isabella opened the gate, and they entered the small yard. The girl ran to the front door and opened it, shouting, Mom, I'm home and I brought a friend who helped me." There was a moment of silence. Then a female voice came from inside the house, a voice Michael knew better than his own, a voice that had inhabited his dreams and nightmares for 7 long years, a voice he never thought he would hear again. "Bella, what are you doing home at this hour? Aren't you supposed to be at school?" And then she appeared at the door. Julia. Michael's eyes met hers, and the entire world seemed to stop. Time froze. The air became thick, unbreathable. Michael felt his legs weaken. Julia was different. Thinner, with deep, dark circles under her eyes, her hair shorter than he remembered. But it was her. It was Julia. His Julia. She saw him and turned pale. Her hands gripped the doorframe as if she needed support to keep from falling. Her eyes widened in pure shock. "Michael," she whispered, and it was just a breath of a voice almost inaudible. Isabella looked from one to the other, confused. "Do you know each other?" she asked, her innocence still intact. But neither of them could answer. Michael and Julia just kept looking at each other, trapped in a web of emotions that 7 years of separation had not been enough to undo. And as the silence stretched on, heavy and laden with everything that was never said, Isabella began to realize that something much bigger was happening there. Something she didn't yet understand. But that would change everything. The silence that settled in that small yard in the South Bronx was deafening. Michael and Julia remained motionless, like 2 statues frozen in time, unable to process the magnitude of what was happening. His eyes searched hers for some explanation for this impossible encounter. Her eyes reflected a whirlwind of emotions: surprise, fear, pain, and something else he couldn't quite decipher. Isabella looked from one to the other with growing confusion. The girl was smart enough to realize that something extraordinary was happening, but too young to understand the full complexity of the situation. "Mom?" She gently tugged on the hem of Julia's blouse. "Do you know the man?" The girl's voice seemed to break the spell. Julia blinked rapidly, as if waking from a trance, and tried to compose her expression. Her voice came out shaky when she finally spoke. "I do, honey. He's—" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "Someone I knew a long time ago, before you were born." Michael still couldn't speak. His throat was tight, his mind spinning in circles trying to understand. Julia was there before him, after 7 years of absolute absence. 7 years without a word, without a sign, without a trace. He had looked for her in the first few months after the separation, but she seemed to have completely vanished. She had changed her cell phone number, deleted all her social media profiles, cut contact with mutual friends. It was as if she had dissolved into thin air, and now, so surreally, he found her again through a child singing on the subway. Julia took a step back, still holding the doorframe as if she needed the physical support. "Come in," she said in a hoarse voice. "We can't stand here at the door. The neighbors will start to stare." Michael nodded mechanically and followed Isabella into the house. The interior was simple but clean and organized. The living room was small, with an old but well-preserved sofa, a modest television on a scratched wooden stand, and a few photographs on the wall. There was no luxury here, but there was life. There was humanity. It was so different from his cold, empty mansion that it seemed to belong to another universe. "Sit," Julia offered, pointing to the sofa. "I'll make some coffee." Or would you prefer water? Coffee is fine, Michael finally managed to articulate. His voice sounded strange even to himself, as if it belonged to someone else. Julia disappeared into the kitchen, and Michael could hear her clattering pans, turning on faucets, trying to keep her hands busy. Isabella sat next to him on the sofa, swinging her little legs that didn't reach the floor. She was still trying to understand what was happening. "Were you and my mum friends?" she asked with genuine curiosity. Michael looked at the child and felt his heart tighten even more. "We were, Bella, very good friends." The girl smiled. "That's cool. My mom doesn't have many friends. She works a lot. Well, she used to. Now she's sick and can't anymore. That's why I try to help by singing on the subway, but don't tell her, okay? She'll be mad if she finds out." Michael promised with a nod. He looked around the room again, and his eyes fell on the photographs on the wall. There were several of Isabella at different ages, smiling, playing, always with that characteristic sparkle in her eyes. In some photos, Julia appeared, hugging her daughter, both happy. But in none of them was there a man. No hint of a father figure, no sign that Isabella had a father present in her life. The realization began to dawn slowly on Michael, but he still refused to believe it. It couldn't be. It would be too much of a coincidence. It would be too impossible. It would be too painful. Julia returned from the kitchen carrying 2 cups of coffee on a trembling tray. She placed the tray on the coffee table and sat in the armchair across from Michael, maintaining a safe distance. "Bella, honey, why don't you go play in the yard for a bit? Your mom needs to talk to the man." "But Mom," Isabella protested, "I wanted to stay here too." "Obey, honey, please." There was a firmness in Julia's voice that allowed no argument. Isabella pouted but obeyed, picked up a worn-out doll from a corner of the room, and went out the back door, dragging her feet. When they were alone, the silence once again weighed heavily upon them. Michael picked up the coffee cup just to have something to do with his hands. Julia kept her eyes fixed on her lap, where her hands were nervously intertwined. It was several, long minutes before she finally spoke. "I never expected to see you again," she said softly, "much less like this." Michael took a sip of the coffee, which was too hot and burned his tongue, but he barely felt it. "Me neither," he replied. "My car broke down this morning. I had to take the subway. That's where I found Bella. She was singing that song, our song." Julia closed her eyes upon hearing that. A look of pain crossed her face. "I didn't know she sang on the subway," she murmured. "She goes to school every day, or at least that's what I thought. She's too smart for her own good. She wants to protect me, to help, but she's just a child. She shouldn't be doing this." "You're not well," Michael observed, noticing the deep, dark circles, the excessive thinness, the paleness of her skin. "What happened, Julia?" She opened her eyes and finally looked at him. "It's been so many years, Michael. So much has happened. I don't even know where to begin." "Then start at the beginning," he urged, leaning forward slightly. "I have time. I have all the time in the world." Julia took a deep breath as if gathering courage. "After we separated, I didn't know what to do. I was destroyed. My world had ended. I went back to my parents' house for a few weeks, but I couldn't stay there. Everything reminded me of you, so I decided to start from scratch. I moved into a small apartment, got a job as a secretary at an accounting firm. I didn't earn much, but it was enough to get by." "And then?" Michael prompted, though a part of him already knew what was coming next. "Then I found out I was pregnant," Julia said, her voice breaking. 2 weeks after the separation, I started feeling sick. I went to the doctor and found out. I was almost 2 months along." "You got pregnant while we were still together," Michael stated, feeling the blood run cold in his veins. "The last time was," he tried to remember, "a week before you left." It was. Michael placed the cup on the table because his hands began to tremble violently. "And you didn't tell me," he said. And it wasn't a question, it was an accusation laden with pain. "You were pregnant and you didn't tell me." "I wanted to," Julia replied, tears beginning to stream down her face. "I swear I wanted to. I spent 2 weeks gathering the courage. I imagined 1,000 times what it would be like to find you, what I would say, how you would react. I was scared, Michael, so scared. We had ended things so horribly, with so much anger, so much hurt. I didn't know how you would take the news, if you would think it was a trick, if you would accuse me of trying to trap you, if you would—" She stopped, sobbing. Michael felt an anger begin to boil inside him, but at the same time a pain so deep it threatened to break him in two. "And yet, even with your fear, you should have told me," he said in a tense voice. "It was my right to know. It was my right to be there. She was my daughter too." "I know." Julia was now crying openly. I know, I was wrong, I was so wrong. But when I finally got the courage to go look for you, I saw you. I saw you leaving that fancy restaurant on 11th Avenue. And you weren't alone, you were with that woman, that employee of yours, Rebecca." Michael felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. Rebecca. Damned Rebecca. The financial consultant who worked at his firm, who had been one of the reasons for the final fight with Julia. Julia had always been jealous of her, always thought there was something between them, and Michael had always denied it. He truly never had anything with Rebecca, but he admitted the woman was too close, that she flirted inappropriately, that she created ambiguous situations. And on that specific day, a few weeks after the separation, Rebecca had invited him to dinner under the pretext of discussing an important project. Michael, still devastated by the separation and not wanting to be alone at home, had accepted. "That was nothing, Julia," he explained desperately. "She invited me to a work dinner. I was a wreck, destroyed over losing you. I only accepted because I couldn't stand being alone in that house anymore. But there was nothing between us. Never was. You have to believe me." "But I didn't know that," Julia retorted, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "From the outside, across the street, what I saw was you smiling at her, laughing at something she said. You looked intimate. You looked happy. And I thought, he's already moved on. He's already forgotten you. He doesn't want you anymore. So what's the point of telling him about the baby? He'll think it's a scam, that you're trying to mess up his new life. So you just decided to exclude me completely," Michael said, the anger now evident in his voice. "You decided I didn't even deserve to know I was going to be a father. You decided to raise my daughter alone without giving me a single chance." "I thought I was doing the right thing," Julia replied, her voice breaking. "I thought you'd be happier without me, without this responsibility. I thought I could handle it on my own. And I tried, Michael, I swear I tried. I worked through the whole pregnancy, saved every penny, moved to this neighborhood because it was what I could afford. When Bella was born, it was the happiest and scariest day of my life. She was so small, so fragile, so perfect, and she looked just like you, the eyes, the shape of her face, that way she furrows her brow. Every time I looked at her, I saw you, and it hurt so much, but at the same time, it was the most beautiful thing in the world." Michael ran his hands over his face, trying to process it all. 7 years. 7 years of his daughter's life that he had lost. The first steps, the first words, the first day of school, the first friendships, everything. He had lost everything because of a misunderstanding, of wounded pride, of a lack of communication. "You're sick," he said, changing the subject because it was more than he could bear at the moment. "Bella told me. What's wrong?" Julia sighed, rubbing her tired eyes. "I had a fall at work a few months ago. I hit my head, ended up in the hospital. The tests showed I had a serious problem, something that would require prolonged treatment and rest. I had to stop working. The money I had saved ran out quickly. The bills started piling up. I tried to find work I could do from home, but my condition doesn't allow for exertion." Bella noticed things were tough and somehow decided she was going to help. "I really didn't know she was going to sing on the subway. If I had known, I would have stopped her immediately." "You need help," Michael said, and it was no longer anger he felt, but concern. "You need proper treatment, you need money to pay the bills, you need someone to take care of you both." "No," Julia cut him off immediately. "I won't accept your charity, Michael. I've managed on my own until now, and I'll continue to manage." "This isn't charity," he retorted, raising his voice. "It's responsibility. If Bella is my daughter, and from what you're telling me she is, then it's my obligation to take care of her. And you too, since you're her mother." "If she's your daughter," Julia repeated, and there was a bitter tone in her voice. "You're not even sure. You're doubting me." Michael hesitated. It wasn't that he doubted her, not really, but 7 years of separation, of silence, of emptiness, had left scars, and the pain of being excluded from his own daughter's life created a wound too deep. "I want to be absolutely sure," he said finally. "I want to do a DNA test." Julia's face closed off completely. She stood up from the armchair, her fists clenched at her sides. "Of course," she said with a humorless laugh. "Of course you want a test, because after everything you still don't trust me. Fine, Michael, do your test. Prove to yourself what I already know, that Isabella is your daughter, that she carries your blood, your stubbornness, your way of being. And when you have the scientific proof you so desperately need, maybe, just maybe, you'll be able to believe something that's already right in front of you." "Julia." Michael stood up too, trying to approach her, but she took a step back. "It's not about trust, it's about being sure. It's about doing things the right way." "The right way," she repeated, shaking her head. "You know what doing things the right way would have been? It would have been talking to me 7 years ago instead of yelling. It would have been seeking me out to understand what was really happening. It would have been believing me when I said there was nothing between you and that woman. But no, you chose pride, and now you want to talk about doing things the right way?" They stood staring at each other, the tension vibrating in the air between them. Outside, they could hear Isabella humming that damn song as she played in the yard. The same song that had united them in the past, that had marked the best and worst moments of their lives, and that now, almost poetically, had reunited them through a daughter Michael never even knew existed. "Do your test," Julia said finally, her voice tired. "Take her to any lab, collect the sample, run the tests. I'll sign whatever is necessary, but after the result comes out, Michael, you're going to have to decide what to do. Because I won't let you walk in and out of her life as if it were a game. She's a child. She deserves stability. She deserves someone who really wants to be there. If you're not sure you can be that person, then you'd better leave now and never come back." Michael felt her words like daggers. "I want to be there," he said vehemently. "I lost 7 years of her life because of our mistakes, both of ours. I'm not going to lose another. I insist on the test not because I doubt you, but because when I take on this responsibility, when I look at her and say I'm her father, I want to be absolutely certain she deserves that. You deserve that, and I deserve that certainty too." Julia watched him for a long moment, trying to read his intentions. Finally she nodded. "All right, we'll do the test. But until then, I want you to think very carefully about what you're doing. Bella has taken a liking to you quickly. She's always wanted a father. If you build up her hopes and then give up, you will destroy her, and I will never forgive you for that." "I won't give up," Michael promised, "and this time I'm going to do things right." In the days that followed, Michael began to visit the house in the South Bronx daily. He told himself it was just to get closer to Isabella, to get to know this child who was possibly his daughter better. But deep down, he knew he also wanted to be near Julia. He wanted to regain her trust, to show that he had changed, that he had grown, that he finally understood the value of what he had lost. He brought food, paid some overdue bills, fixed the leaking kitchen faucet, and painted the peeling exterior wall of the house. Julia protested at first, saying she didn't need his help, that she could manage on her own. But gradually, exhausted by her illness and the constant struggle to survive, she began to give in. She let him help. She let him stay. Isabella loved having Michael around. She showed him the drawings she made at school, told him stories about her friends, and asked for help with her homework. And Michael discovered that he loved it. He discovered a patience and tenderness within himself that he never knew existed. Every smile from Isabella was like a ray of sunshine breaking through the dark clouds that had covered his heart for so many years. A week after their reunion, Michael scheduled the DNA test at a private, discreet lab. Julia and Isabella accompanied him. The process was quick and painless, just a saliva swab. Isabella found it all very interesting and kept asking questions about how it worked, if it hurt, what it was for. Michael answered patiently, explaining that it was a test to help find out if people were related. The girl accepted the explanation without much questioning and soon forgot about it, more interested in asking for ice cream at the shop they had passed on the street. The lab said the result would take about 7 business days. They were the longest 7 days of Michael's life. He knew deep in his heart what the result would be. Isabella was his daughter. There was no denying it. The eyes were the same as his, the shape of her face, even some gestures and mannerisms, but part of him, the rational and careful part, needed that official confirmation. When the email from the lab finally arrived, Michael was at his office. His hands were shaking so much he could barely click on the attachment to open the PDF. When the document appeared on the screen, he had to read it 3 times to be sure he wasn't imagining it. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. Conclusion: the tested male cannot be excluded as the biological father of the tested female. Michael sank into his office chair and cried. He cried like he hadn't cried since he was a child. He cried for everything he had lost, for all the wasted years, for all the firsts he hadn't witnessed. But he also cried with relief, with joy, with gratitude for having a second chance. He had a daughter, a beautiful, intelligent, charismatic daughter who had already completely won his heart. That afternoon he printed the report, carefully placed it in a folder, and drove to the South Bronx. When he arrived at the yellow house with the rusty gate, his heart was beating so hard it felt like it would jump out of his chest. He knocked on the door and Julia answered. She immediately noticed the folder in his hand and turned pale. "Did it arrive?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It arrived," he confirmed. "Can we talk?" Isabella was watching television in the living room. Julia asked her to go play in her room for a few minutes, and the girl obeyed without complaint, already used to these private conversations between the adults. When they were alone, Michael handed the folder to Julia. She took it with trembling hands and opened it. She read the document slowly, line by line. When she finished, she closed the folder and looked at him with teary eyes. "Are you satisfied now?" she asked, but there was no longer anger in her voice, only weariness. "You have the proof you needed." Michael moved closer to her and for the first time in 7 years touched her face. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I'm sorry for doubting. I'm sorry for not being there. I'm sorry for everything. But I promise, Julia, I promise with all my heart that from now on I will be present. I will be the father Bella deserves. And I will take care of you too." Julia closed her eyes, leaning her face slightly into his hand. For a brief moment, they were back in the past, when they were just Michael and Julia, 2 young lovers who believed love would conquer all. Then she pulled away, opening her eyes again. "Now comes the hardest part," she said. "Telling her." The decision to tell Isabella the truth was postponed for 2 days. Not because Michael and Julia didn't want to, but because they were both terrified of the girl's reaction. How would a 7-year-old child process such impactful information? How would she react to discovering that the kind man who had helped her on the subway and who now visited her house daily was in fact her father? Would it be joy, confusion, anger that he hadn't been present before? The possibilities were endless and all terrifying. Michael barely slept thinking about it. Lying in his king-size bed in the silent Upper East Side mansion, he mentally rehearsed 1,000 different ways to tell her. "Bella, I have something important to tell you." "No, too serious. Wait, Bella, do you know your mom and I were married? Is a no, too complicated." "Bella, would you like to have a father?" Too presumptuous. Nothing seemed right. Nothing seemed sufficient for such a crucial moment. Julia was also restless. She knew her daughter better than anyone, and knew that Isabella was sensitive, emotional, but also surprisingly resilient for her age. The girl had already learned too early about hardship, about fighting to survive, about protecting those you love. But that didn't mean she was prepared for a revelation of this magnitude. It was on a Thursday afternoon when Michael arrived for his daily visit that Julia decided they could no longer put it off. Isabella was in the yard playing with an old doll, quietly humming that song, which now held an even deeper meaning for all of them. Julia and Michael looked at each other in the living room, and without needing words, agreed it was time. "Bella, honey," Julia called from the door. "Can you come here for a minute? We need to talk to you." Isabella came running, the doll under her arm and a curious expression on her little face. "Did I do something wrong, Mom?" she asked, worried. "No, love," Julia assured her, sitting on the sofa and signaling for Isabella to sit beside her. "You didn't do anything wrong. Actually, we have something very important to tell you." Michael also sat down on the other side of the girl. His heart was beating so fast, he was sure everyone in the room could hear it. Isabella looked from one to the other, her curiosity turning into something more serious. "Is it about Mommy's sickness?" she asked with a worried little voice. "Is Mommy going to get better?" "I will, my daughter," Julia assured her, stroking the girl's hair. "But that's not what we want to talk about. It's about you. And about Michael." "About me?" Isabella blinked, confused. "What do I have to do with Michael?" Julia took a deep breath. "Remember when you asked me why you never met your father?" Isabella nodded slowly. Her mother had always told her that her father had needed to leave before she was born, but that he surely loved her very much, even without knowing her. It was a simple explanation, perhaps a bit fanciful, but one a small child could accept without too many questions. "Well," Julia continued, choosing each word with care, "the truth is your father never knew you existed. Your mom and he separated before I found out I was pregnant with you, and for several complicated reasons, which you'll understand better when you're older, I ended up not telling him." Isabella frowned, processing the information. "So my dad doesn't know about me?" she asked. "He didn't know," Michael said softly, and it was the first time he had spoken since the conversation began. "But now he knows." The girl looked at him with those large, expressive eyes. "And who told him?" Julia squeezed her daughter's hand. "Bella, my love, your father is Michael." There was absolute silence. Isabella was completely still, as if frozen in time. Her eyes widened, her mouth fell slightly open in shock. She looked at Michael, then at Julia, then back at Michael again, as if trying to solve a puzzle that was far too complex. "Michael," she said slowly, testing the words. "The Michael who helped me on the subway, who brought me home, who comes here every day. That Michael?" "That Michael," Julia confirmed, tears starting to stream down her face. "He's your father, honey." Isabella continued to look at Michael with an intensity that left him completely vulnerable. Then she asked in a trembling little voice, "Are you my real dad, for real, real?" Michael felt his own vision blur with tears. "Yes, Bella, I'm your real dad. We even have a test that proves it. I know I wasn't here before, and I'm so sorry. But it wasn't because I didn't want to be. It was because I didn't know you existed. If I had known, I would have been by your side from the very first day. I promise you that." "Why didn't you know?" Isabella asked, and there was genuine confusion in her voice. "Aren't dads supposed to know when they have kids?" "It's complicated, my daughter," Julia intervened. "Your mom and Michael had some problems when they were married. We had a big fight and separated. When I found out I was pregnant with you, I was scared to tell him. I thought he wouldn't want to know, that he would be angry. So I made the wrong decision and didn't tell him. But now he knows, and he really wants to be part of your life." Isabella processed that for a few more moments. Then her expression began to change. Tear rolled down her cheek, then another, and suddenly she was crying. But it wasn't a sad cry, it was a cry of emotion, of relief, of happiness. "I always wanted a dad," she sobbed. "I always wanted someone to take me to the park, to pick me up from school, to tell me stories before bed. The other girls at school have dads, and I always pretended I didn't care. But I did. I wanted a dad so much too." Michael could no longer hold back. He pulled her into a tight hug, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, because she was. Isabella clung to him tightly, soaking his shirt with her tears. "You have a dad now, Bella," he whispered in her ear, "and I will always be here, I promise. No matter what happens, I'm never leaving again." Julia joined the hug, wrapping her arms around both of them. And there, on that old little sofa in a modest house in the South Bronx, a family that had been separated by years of pain and misunderstandings was finally reunited. It wasn't perfect. There were wounds that still needed to heal, difficult conversations that still needed to be had, adjustments they would all have to make. But it was real. It was genuine. And for the first time in a long time, it had a future. The days that followed were a period of adjustment. Michael started picking Isabella up from school every afternoon. The first time he showed up at the gate, the other children and mothers were curious. Who was this elegant man, in an imported car, coming to pick up the girl from the South Bronx? Isabella didn't care about the curious stares. She would run to him, with a huge smile shout, "Daddy!" from afar, and throw herself into his arms. Michael felt his heart explode with happiness every time he heard that word. Daddy. He was a father. He had a daughter. And she loved him. He took her for ice cream, to the park, to the bookstore where he bought stacks of children's books that she chose with enthusiasm. On Saturdays, he would take Isabella and Julia to lunch at different restaurants, showing them corners of the city Julia had never visited. On Sundays, they stayed home, the three of them together, watching movies, playing board games, cooking together. It was a simple routine, but filled with love and presence. Julia was recovering, with Michael covering the household expenses and paying for proper medical treatment. She could finally rest and take care of herself. The dark circles under her eyes began to fade. Color returned to her face, and that characteristic glow Michael loved so much began to reappear in her eyes. They talked more too, long conversations about the past, about the mistakes they had made, about the hurts that needed to be healed. It wasn't easy. There were moments when old wounds reopened, when arguments resurfaced, when trust was tested, but they were both committed to making it work, for themselves, but especially for Isabella. One evening, about a month after the revelation, Michael was sitting with Julia on the small back porch of the house after Isabella had gone to sleep. They were drinking tea and watching the stars, which even with the city's light pollution, still managed to shine timidly in the sky. "You know I never stopped loving you," Michael said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "In all these 7 years I tried to move on, tried to forget you, but I never could. You were always the one, Julia." Julia turned to face him. Her eyes were teary. "I never stopped loving you either," she admitted. "Even when I was angry, even when I thought you had moved on, even when I raised Bella alone and thought it would be like that forever. I always loved you. And I always will." They looked at each other for a long moment, their entire history hanging in the air between them. Then, slowly, Michael leaned in and kissed her. It was a soft kiss, laden with years of longing, regret, forgiveness, and hope. When they separated, they were both crying. But the peace of this reborn family was brutally interrupted one Saturday afternoon. Michael had gone to pick up some clothes from his mansion on the Upper East Side and had promised to be back for dinner. Isabella and Julia were in the kitchen preparing an apple pie, the girls' favorite recipe, when they heard the gate creak. "It must be Daddy, back early," Isabella said excitedly, running to the door. But when she opened it, it wasn't Michael standing there, it was Rebecca. The woman was impeccable as always, wearing an expensive suit, high heels with perfectly styled hair and flawless makeup. She looked at Isabella with a barely concealed expression of disdain. "Who are you, child?" she asked sharply. "Where's Michael?" Julia appeared behind Isabella, drying her hands on a dish towel. When she saw Rebecca, her face immediately hardened. "What do you want here?" she asked coldly. Rebecca smiled, but it was a venomous smile. "I came to see Michael, of course. I've been trying to reach him for weeks, but he doesn't answer my calls, doesn't reply to my emails. Then I heard through some office gossip that he's been spending a lot of time here. In this neighborhood, in this house." She looked around with contempt. "With you. I wanted to see with my own eyes what a man like Michael Taylor is doing in a place like this." Julia felt anger boil inside her, but maintained her composure. "Michael isn't here right now, and even if he were, he has nothing to say to you. I suggest you leave." "Leave?" Rebecca laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. "Darling, do you really think you can compete with me? You living in this pathetic little house, in this poor neighborhood, sick, jobless, with a child to raise. Just look at you. You look like a beggar. And you want me to believe that Michael chose this over everything I can offer him? My mom is not a beggar, Isabella said in a firm voice, despite the tears that were beginning to form in her eyes. My mom is beautiful and strong and the best mom in the world. Rebecca looked at the girl as if she were only now truly seeing her. And you must be the so-called daughter, right? The child who appeared out of nowhere. How convenient. The rich and successful Michael reappears in his poor ex-wife's life, and suddenly she has a daughter by him. What a touching fairy tale. Julia took a step forward, protectively placing herself in front of Isabella. Be careful what you say, Rebecca. You know nothing about our life, about our history, about anything. Oh, but I do, Rebecca retorted. I know you're a gold digger who saw a golden opportunity and seized it. I know this child probably isn't even Michael's real daughter. I know you're using her to manipulate him, to get money from him, to get back to the good life you had before. Enough, a thunderous voice came from the gate. Michael was there, his face red with rage, his fists clenched. He had returned and heard part of the conversation. Rebecca, you've crossed every line. Get out of my sight now. Michael, Rebecca tried to change her tone to something more seductive. But you don't understand. This woman is deceiving you. She's using you. Come back to your real life, to the people who really care about you. My real life is here, Michael said, his voice as cold as ice, with Julia and with Isabella, with my family, and you never were and never will be a part of it. Isabella is my daughter. We have the DNA test to prove it, and even if she weren't, even if Julia weren't my ex-wife, I would still choose them, because they are real. They are true. You are just a poisonous shadow from my past. Rebecca turned pale. You'll regret this, she said, her voice trembling with anger. You're throwing away a perfect life for a fantasy. You'll end up alone and miserable. I've already been alone and miserable, Michael replied. For 7 years I lived in an empty mansion surrounded by expensive things but with no purpose. Now I've finally found what really matters. So you can leave and don't come back. You're not welcome here. Rebecca looked at Julia with pure hatred. You think you've won, don't you? She hissed. But let's see how long this lasts. Let's see if he doesn't get tired of playing happy family and come back to the real world. And then Julia did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She picked up the glass of water that was on the table near the door and threw its contents in Rebecca's face. The woman screamed, water running down her face, smudging her expensive makeup. This is the real world, Julia said calmly, and in the real world, people like you have no power over people like us. Now get out of my house before I make you leave. Rebecca recoiled, still in shock, dripping water on her expensive clothes. She shot one last hateful look at the three of them, and then turned and left, slamming the gate shut with force. The silence that followed was heavy. Then Isabella started to laugh. It was a quiet laugh at first, but it grew until it became a contagious giggle. You threw water in her face, Mom, she exclaimed between laughs. That was awesome. Julia started laughing too, the tension finally dissipating. Michael watched them, and soon he was laughing too. The three of them hugged, laughing and crying at the same time, more united than ever. That confrontation, as unpleasant as it had been, had solidified something important. They were a family, and no one from the outside had the power to destroy that. After the confrontation with Rebecca, something definitively changed in the family's dynamic. It was as if that unpleasant episode had burned the last bridges to the past, leaving only the path to the future. Michael began to spend more and more time at the house in the South Bronx, often sleeping on the sofa after Isabella was in bed, talking with Julia late into the night. They talked about everything, about old dreams they had abandoned, about plans for the future, about how to raise Isabella in the best way possible, about the small daily joys they had learned to value again. One night, about 2 months after the paternity revelation, Michael was lying on the living room sofa, unable to sleep. The house was small, the walls were thin, and he could hear Julia moving in the next room. He knew she couldn't sleep either. He got up quietly and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. He found Julia already there, sitting at the table, holding a mug of warm tea between her hands. Can't sleep, she asked softly when she saw him. Michael shook his head and sat down beside her. "Julia, we need to talk about something." She looked at him with a worried expression. "About what?" "About you. Two living here," he began, choosing his words carefully. "This house is great and I know you're very fond of it, but it's getting too small for all of us. Bella is growing, she needs more space. You need a more comfortable environment to finish your recovery, and He hesitated. "I can't stand being away from you anymore. I can't stand going back to that empty mansion on the Upper East Side every day. I want to wake up and see you two. I want to have breakfast with Bella. I want to be truly present, not just during visits." Julia looked down at her teacup. "Where do you want us to go?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Michael took her hand gently. "I want you to come live with me, in the house on the Upper East Side. I know there are a lot of bad memories there, memories of us when things went wrong, but we can create new memories, good memories. We can turn that house into a real home, full of laughter, love, and life, the way it should have been from the beginning." Julia was silent for a long moment, processing the invitation. "Michael, this is very fast. We're just starting to rebuild our relationship. We've barely managed to solve our own problems. Are you sure this is what you want?" "I'm not just sure," he replied firmly. "I'm absolutely certain. Julia, I lost 7 years of my life, 7 years I'll never get back. I don't want to waste another single day. I want to build a real family with you and Bella. I want you to have comfort, security, everything you deserve. And more than anything, I want to be with you. Always." Julia felt tears welling up in her eyes. "And what if it doesn't work? What if we start fighting again? What if the old wounds come back?" Michael squeezed her hand affectionately. "Then we'll talk. We'll work it out. We won't make the same mistakes as in the past. We've learned, Julia. We both have. I'm no longer that proud, stubborn man who would rather stay silent than admit his mistakes. And you've changed too. We're more mature, more aware. And we have Bella now. She deserves to grow up with both her parents present, in a home where she feels safe and loved." "And that's what I want too," Julia admitted, wiping away her tears. "I want us to be a real family. I want to give Bella the childhood she deserves. And She hesitated, but then decided to be completely honest. "I want to be with you, Michael. I want to try again. I want to see if we can make it work this time." "Then come," he pleaded. "Come live with me. Bring Bella. Let's start over, the right way." Julia nodded slowly, a shy smile appearing on her face. "Okay, let's try." They hugged there in the quiet kitchen, and it was a hug of new beginnings, of hope, of a love that had never truly died. Telling Isabella the news the next morning was a delightful experience. The girl jumped for joy when she learned they were going to live in her daddy's big house. "Will I have my own room?" she asked, her eyes shining. "You will," Michael promised. "A huge room decorated just the way you want, with all the dolls and books you want. We can even paint one wall with chalkboard paint for you to draw on." Isabella squealed with excitement and jumped into his lap, covering his face with kisses. "You're the best dad in the world," she exclaimed. The move happened 2 weeks later. There wasn't much to take from the house in the South Bronx, just clothes, a few pieces of furniture with sentimental value, and the memories Julia insisted on preserving. Michael hired a moving company, and in a single day everything was transferred. When they arrived at the mansion on the Upper East Side, Isabella was speechless. The house was immense, with its 3 floors, well-tended gardens, and sparkling swimming pool. "Is it a castle?" she asked in awe. "It's our home," Michael corrected with a smile. "Our home now." The first few weeks in the mansion were a period of adjustment. Isabella explored every corner, amazed by the size of the rooms, the library filled with books, and the game room Michael had set up especially for her. Julia was amazed too, but for different reasons. She remembered living there as Michael's wife, when everything was new and exciting. Now, returning years later, everything felt both familiar and completely different. Michael kept his word and transformed the house. He hired decorators to give the rooms a warmer feel, replacing cold modern furniture with more comfortable, family-friendly pieces. Isabella's room was decorated exactly as she had asked. Light pink walls, a canopy bed, shelves full of books and toys, and an entire wall covered with chalkboard paint where she drew every day. Julia's room was next to Isabella's, a large bright space overlooking the garden. Michael remained in the master bedroom, though he spent many sleepless nights wishing Julia were there by his side. The family's routine settled naturally. Michael went back to working at the office, but now he always left on time, never staying late as he used to. He wanted to be home for dinner with his family, to help Isabella with her homework, to talk with Julia about her day. Julia, who was much better health-wise, began to take care of the house, although Mrs. Teresa continued to work there, and the two developed a lovely friendship. Isabella was radiant. For the first time in her life, she had everything she had ever dreamed of: a present father, a healthy mother, a comfortable home, and more love than her little heart could hold. The months went by and life took on a gentle, happy cadence. Michael and Julia were rediscovering each other, relearning to trust, to love without the ghosts of the past. They would go out for dinner alone sometimes, leaving Isabella with Mrs. Teresa, and in those moments they felt like that young, passionate couple from years ago again. Other times they did things as a family. They went to the park, the movies, restaurants, museums. Isabella absorbed everything like a sponge, amazed by a world she had previously only seen from a distance. It was on one of those Saturday mornings, 6 months after moving into the mansion, that Michael made a decision. He woke up early while Julia and Isabella were still asleep and went to the living room. He opened the drawer of the sideboard where he kept important items and took out a small navy blue velvet box. Inside was an engagement ring, the same ring he had given Julia over 12 years ago when he had first asked for her hand in marriage. She had returned it on the night she left, leaving it on the bedroom dresser along with her wedding band. Michael had kept both, unable to part with them, even in the darkest moments of his loneliness. Now holding the ring up to the morning light, he knew it was time. That morning Michael prepared a special breakfast: pancakes, fresh fruit, fresh juice, freshly brewed coffee. He set everything on the kitchen table with a nice tablecloth and flowers from the garden. When Julia and Isabella came down, still in their pajamas and looking sleepy, they were surprised by the scene. "What is all this?" Julia asked, confused but smiling. "It's a special breakfast," Michael announced, "for very special people." They sat down and ate together, talking and laughing. Isabella told them about a crazy dream she'd had, where she was flying on a giant cat. Michael and Julia laughed at the girl's animated descriptions. When they finished eating, Michael stood up, his expression turning serious. Julia looked at him curiously. "Michael, is everything okay?" "Everything is perfect," he replied. "More than perfect. And that's why I need to do something I should have done a long time ago." He knelt before Julia, who gasped in shock. Isabella's jaw dropped too, sensing the magnitude of the moment, even at her young age. Michael took the little box out of his pocket and opened it, revealing the ring that sparkled in the morning light. "Julia Miller," he began, his voice thick with emotion, 12 years ago I asked you the same question, and you said yes. But I failed you. I failed to be the husband you deserved, to fight for our marriage when things got tough, to look for you when I should have most. I lost 7 years that I can never get back. But now, with you and Bella here, I've discovered that life can give second chances. I've discovered that true love doesn't die. It just waits for the right moment to be reborn. So I'm here on my knees asking for that second chance. Marry me, Julia. Again. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that I've changed, that I've learned, that I will love and respect you the way you always deserved. Let me be the husband you always wanted, and the father Bella deserves. Marry me? Julia was crying copiously. The tears streamed down her face without stopping, but they were tears of pure happiness. She extended her trembling hand, and he slid the ring onto her finger. Yes, she sobbed. Yes, yes, 1,000 times. Yes. Isabella jumped from her chair and threw herself on top of them, screaming with joy. They're getting married. They're getting married. I'm going to have a real family. The three of them hugged tightly, crying and laughing at the same time. The wedding was set for 3 months later. Unlike the first time when they had a large, lavish ceremony, this time they opted for something intimate and meaningful, just close family and dearest friends. The ceremony would be in the garden of the mansion itself, among the flowers and trees that Michael had specially planted for the occasion. Julia chose a simple but elegant white dress with lace details. Isabella would be the flower girl, in a light pink dress that perfectly matched the bouquet of roses she would carry. The wedding day dawned sunny and perfect. The garden was decorated with delicate floral arrangements, white chairs arranged in a semicircle around a small improvised altar. There were perhaps 30 people there, but the love present was enough to fill an entire stadium. When the music began to play, Isabella appeared first, walking slowly down the petal-strewn aisle, her little face serious in concentration as she scattered more rose petals along the path. Then Julia appeared, and Michael felt his heart would burst. She was beautiful, radiant, with a sparkle in her eyes he hadn't seen in years. She walked alone, with no one to give her away, because this decision was hers alone, and she was making it freely without pressure or obligation. When she reached the altar, Michael took her hands. The officiant began the ceremony, but Michael barely heard the words. He was lost in Julia's eyes, in her smile, in the promise of a future he saw reflected there. It was time for the vows, and Michael took a deep breath. "Julia," he said, his voice firm despite the emotion, "today I'm not just marrying you. I'm committing to a lifetime of love, respect, and partnership. I promise to be by your side on good days and bad. I promise to listen when you need to talk, and to hold you when words aren't enough. I promise to be the father Bella deserves, and the man you always wanted me to be. I promise not to let pride or fear destroy what we've built, and I promise, above all, to love you every day of my life with the same intensity I loved you on the first day, but with the wisdom that only years and mistakes could have taught me." Julia was crying, but smiling at the same time. "Michael," she said in a choked voice, "you were my great love once, and losing you was the deepest pain I've ever felt. But finding you again was the miracle I didn't even know I was waiting for. Today, I promise to love you without reservation, to forgive you without resentment, and to build with you the future that was stolen from us in the past. I promise to be your partner, your best friend, your companion in everything. I promise to raise our daughter with you, and to give her all the love and structure she deserves. And I promise to never again let fear stop me from fighting for us." They exchanged the rings, the same ones they had worn at their first wedding, which Michael had polished and engraved with a new date. When the officiant declared them husband and wife again, Michael pulled Julia into a deep, passionate kiss. The guests applauded, but in that moment for Michael and Julia there was no one else in the world but the two of them and their daughter, who watched everything with shining eyes. The reception was simple but joyous. There was music, dancing, delicious food. Isabella ran non-stop among the guests, showing everyone her flower girl dress, proudly telling them that her parents had just gotten married. When it was time to cut the cake, the three of them did it together, a united and complete family. And when the band started to play that song, the song that had united them from the beginning, Michael and Julia danced in the center of the garden, holding each other so tightly it was impossible to know where one ended and the other began. Isabella joined them in the middle of the song, and the three of them danced together, laughing and crying with happiness. Life followed its natural, happy course. Michael and Julia finally shared the master bedroom of the mansion, waking up together every morning, falling asleep in each other's arms every night. Isabella flourished under the love and care of both parents. Her grades in school improved, she made new friends, and she developed talents for drawing and music. She always sang that special song, but now without the sadness it once carried. Now it was a song of joy, of unity, of love. 2 years after the wedding, on a sunny spring morning, Julia woke up feeling strangely nauseous. She went to the bathroom and was sick. Michael, worried, wanted to take her to the doctor immediately, but she calmed him down. "I think I know what this is," she said with a mysterious smile. The next day she took a test. She was pregnant. When she told Michael, he lifted her into his arms and spun her around the room, laughing and crying at the same time. "We're having another baby," he exclaimed. Isabella, who heard the commotion and ran down to see what was happening, jumped for joy when she found out she was going to be a big sister. The pregnancy was smooth. Michael was present at every appointment, every ultrasound, every moment. This time he wouldn't miss a thing. When they found out it would be a boy, Isabella chose the name Gabriel. She said it was an angel's name, and that her little brother would be her little angel. Gabriel's birth was a moment of pure emotion. Michael held his son in his arms for the first time and thought of everything he had been through, all the suffering, all the loneliness, all the empty nights. And he realized it had all been worth it, because it had led him here, to this perfect moment. Isabella fell in love with her little brother immediately. She helped change him, give him baths supervised by her parents, and choose his outfits. And every time Gabriel cried, no matter the hour, she would run to his crib and sing to him. She sang that song, the subway song, her parents' song, the family's song. And Gabriel would calm down, looking up at his big sister with curious, bright eyes, so much like his father's. The years continued to pass, bringing challenges as all lives do, but also bringing countless joys. Gabriel grew up, started to walk, to talk, to chase his sister around the garden. Isabella became a beautiful and intelligent teenager, always protective of her younger brother. Michael and Julia grew old together, with grey hair, wrinkles from so much smiling, their hands always intertwined. The mansion on the Upper East Side, once a silent mausoleum, became a vibrant home, full of laughter, music, and life. One evening, many years later, when Isabella was a young adult studying art in college, and Gabriel was a clever boy with mischievous green eyes, Michael and Julia were sitting on the back porch, watching the stars. "It's funny," Julia said softly, "how life surprises us. 7 years apart, 7 years of pain, and all it took was a little girl singing on the subway to bring us back together." "It wasn't the girl who brought us together," Michael corrected, pulling her closer. "It was love, a love that never truly died, that just waited for the right moment to find us again." Julia rested her head on his shoulder. "Do you think we would be this happy if we hadn't separated, if we had stayed together from the beginning?" Michael thought for a moment. "Maybe," he replied. "But maybe we wouldn't value what we have so much. Sometimes we need to lose something to understand its true worth. And I lost you, Julia. I lost you, and wasted 7 years of our lives. But it taught me to never take you for granted again, to value every day, every moment, every conversation, every smile." From inside the house, they could hear Gabriel laughing at something Isabella was showing him on her phone. The boy's laugh was contagious, full of life and innocence. "We're so lucky," Julia murmured, "so lucky to have had a second chance, to have built this beautiful family, to have found our way back to each other." Michael kissed the top of her head. "Fate separated us for 7 years, but in the end, it gave us back everything we had lost and so much more. It gave us Bella, who brought us together. It gave us Gabriel, who completed our family. And it gave us the wisdom not to make the same mistakes." They sat there, holding each other, watching the stars and listening to their children's laughter inside the house. And Michael thought about how strange and wonderful life was at the same time, how a broken-down car on an ordinary morning could change everything, how a child singing on the subway could be the link between the past and the future, how true love, the kind that withstands time and distance, always finds its way back. Inside the house, Gabriel started to whimper, and immediately Isabella began to sing. That song, the song that had always been there like an invisible thread connecting them all through the years, the tears, the pain, and the joy. Michael and Julia looked at each other and smiled. It was the soundtrack of their lives, the melody of their family, the proof that some loves are eternal. And there, on that porch, under the New York stars, surrounded by the love of their children and the certainty of having finally found their place in the world, Michael and Julia understood the deepest truth, no matter how far. Our paths may lead us. True love always finds its way back home. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Michael, Julia, and Isabella has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of love, forgiveness and second chances, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment marked you the most. Was it the encounter on the subway, the revelation of paternity, the confrontation with Rebecca, or the happy ending they all deserved? Every day we bring intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul that make us laugh, cry, and believe that true love always wins. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode, with another story that will stir your emotions and make you reflect on the paths of life. Until then.